Remember how I said that the computer was just doing a great job, and so I was going to record an extra one because it wasn't freezing? Shortly after that, it froze, and luckily I was able to fix it. So I'm still going to read you chapter 6 of The Iron Dragon Never Sleeps. This is kind of an interesting story about some of the racism that was faced by Chinese immigrants to California. Um, Normally, when we're meeting, I would show you guys a big long video about the history of the Chinese in California, which is super interesting. But I'm going to see if I can find it on PBS so that you guys can watch it anyway, because it's pretty interesting. They faced so much discrimination. Um, and they stayed after the gold rush and really helped out with the railroad. So once the railroad was done being built, all the people in California just kind of wanted them out of California and treated them very, very poorly. So we're going to read chapter 6. On Sundays, the railroad workers were supposed to rest. They caught up on their sleep or played games or even cleaned their clothes. It was the one day Winnie expected to spend with her father, but things did not work out that way. On the first Sunday, her father was in bed with a cold. On the next two, he had ended up traveling on railroad business. The fourth Sunday, though, dawned bright and clear. It was a perfect day for a picnic. The Tuckers piled into the buckboard right after breakfast and headed for Donner Lake. Ooh, Donner Lake. Donner Lake, where the Donners built their cabin by the lake and died. They arrived there just in time for lunch. That's a weird place to have lunch, huh? Where the cannibals hung out. They arrived there just in time for lunch. Mrs. Swanson had made them up a basket that could have fed them twice. There was fried chicken and deviled eggs and biscuits and 2 kinds of pie. Winnie tried everything, including both pies. "It's beautiful here," she said. "I wish we could stay forever." Her mother laughed. "What about Sacramento, Winnie? Don't you want to go back?" "Well, I miss Rose and Julia, of course." Winnie made a face. "But I'm not looking forward to school. Rose says we're going to learn to dance." "Dance?" her father gasped. "How horrible! Not with boys, I hope." Winnie folded her arms. "Not right away." Eli smiled and mopped his brow. "That's a relief," he said. Marjorie looked out at the lake, brushing the pie crumbs from her skirt. The blue water was still, reflecting the mountains beyond them. "It is beautiful here," she said, "but a little sad, too." "Sad?" said Winnie. Her mother nodded. "The country is changing fast, Winnie. I came through here in '49 on a Conestoga wagon. It took 6 strong horses to pull it. The wagon was like a house on wheels. Everything we owned was in there. We lived in it for most of the year coming west from St. Louis. But you made it safely." "We did. Not everyone was so lucky. 20 years ago, people died of starvation right around here." Winnie gulped. "Died?" "Donner Lake is named for the Donner Party," her mother went on. "They were a group of immigrants traveling west. They got stuck up here for the winter of 1847. Many starved to death." Even in the bright June sunshine, Winnie shivered. "Well, we won't starve," said her father, patting his stomach. "Not today, at any rate." He stood up and stretched. "I have something for you in the buckboard, Winnie." "What is it?" Winnie asked. Her father pulled back a blanket and took out a kite. It was shaped like a diamond with a tail of red cloth. Winnie beamed. "It's wonderful. I'm going to try it out right now." She ran through the field, trailing the kite behind her. She imagined the wind lifting her kite high. It would soar past the clouds. It would dance with the sun. Winnie turned. The kite was dragging along the ground. The wind was paying it no attention at all. "Come on, kite," said Winnie. "Do you hear me? Let's go." Someone laughed behind her. Winnie turned. It was Chang, the boy from the railroad. Winnie was embarrassed. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Lee shrugged. He was in a good mood. "I have cleaned my clothes. I am not needed to kill chickens and pigs. I like the lake, so I am here." "Well, I don't need you laughing at me. Go away." Lee eyed the fallen kite. "I do not want to go away. I want to help." "I know what I'm doing," said Winnie. Yeah, she was just talking to a kite. "I know what I'm doing. I'm yelling at my kite." A kite is like a bird, said Lee. You cannot pull it like a wagon. May I try? I guess so, said Winnie. It was hard to stay angry at someone who didn't get angry back. She handed over the kite. First, we must learn the wind, he said. Lee looped the string around his hand. Winnie had to admit he seemed to know what he was doing. Well, duh, like kites are. Many countries have a tradition of kite flying. China is one of them. They just make fantastic, intricate kites. There are also other countries too that are on the Asian continent that are they're like kite flying is part of their culture. Persia was a big kite flying empire, and so he kind of knows a little bit more about kites than she does. First, we must learn the wind, he said. Lee looped the string around his hand. Winnie had to admit he seemed to know what he was doing. Now we begin. Lee ran back and forth, shifting the kite with the breeze. In his hands, it truly flew like a bird. He soon had the kite up above the trees. Winnie ran to keep up with him. Don't you wish you could fly like that? She asked. I can, said Lee. In my dreams. He turned to Winnie. Now it's your turn. He gave her back the kite and showed her how to keep pressure on the string. Then they stood silently, watching the kite dip and weave against the blue sky. They stirred only when a passing cloud blocked out the sun. Where did you learn to fly kites? Winnie asked. From my father, many years ago. I'm visiting my father this summer. He works for the railroad. My mother and I came out from Sacramento on the train. I would like to ride the train someday, said Lee. It makes me think of a great iron dragon. Winnie laughed. Why, that's what I think too. It eats fire and breathes steam. My brother Tom once rode behind the engine, said Lee. He said it was very noisy. A dragon is not a quiet beast, said Winnie. They watched the kite take a sudden dip. Can your parents take the train to visit you? Winnie asked. No, said Lee. They are dead. A terrible sickness took them in San Francisco. It was long ago. I'm sorry, said Winnie. Lee nodded. Afterward, my brother Tom and I lived in a miner's house. I worked in the house, Tom worked in the mine. How long were you there? Winnie asked. 3 years. It is where I learned English. When the mine closed, we had to leave. Aren't you young to work for the railroad? Asked Winnie. They do not look at us too closely, said Lee. And they were happy I spoke English. Tom is older. He works with miners. So does my father, said Winnie. Maybe they know each other. Lee shrugged. There is little time for meeting, he said. My father's sitting over there, said Winnie. She pointed toward the water. With my mother. Would you like to meet them? You could have some pie. Lee looked uncomfortable. I like pie, but I do not think so. Things are happening. Things? Winnie frowned. What things? Suddenly she remembered the two men she had overheard in town. Many workers are not happy. We work hard as anyone, but we are not treated the same. Winnie thought about the storekeeper and Jane and Johnny. She did not know what to say. Some voices, said Lee, speak of working no more. They are angry voices. What do you think? Winnie asked. I do not decide yet, said Lee. He gave her back the kite string. Maybe I say too much. It is getting late. Goodbye, Winnie Tucker. He turned and ran away. Winnie pulled the kite and walked slowly back to her parents. Who was that, Winnie? Her father asked. Chinese, wasn't he? Yes, Papa, that was Lee, the celestial I've met before. Lee seems to know about kites, said her mother. Winnie nodded. He knows a lot. He used to work for a miner after his parents died. That's how he learned English. She paused for a breath. And Papa, remember what I told you about those men in town? When I asked Lee about it, he got nervous. I think the Celestials are angry. Her father sighed. That may well be, but sometimes you can't go looking for trouble. You have to wait for it to hit you over the head. Come on now, let's clean up, and then we'll take that boat ride I promised. Winnie enjoyed rowing on the lake. She made ripples in the water with her hand and splashed her father with an oar. But her attention also wandered. What kind of trouble could be coming, and when? Maybe she couldn't do anything about it, but she kept thinking about Lee and the angry voices. So, one of the things that happened with the railroads a bit was that the working conditions were super unsafe, and so occasionally there were strikes. The Chinese workers would try to strike, And we talked about strikes a little bit before when we were learning about Cesar Chavez. So the railroad, the Chinese workers would agree to stop work. And when they stopped work, there was a big race to build the train tracks. We heard about that only a moment ago because the railroad companies wanted all the free land that went with building railroad tracks. And so when they stopped work, it caused a lot of tension, and the railroad, the people that were building the railroad, the owners, the managers, the management of the railroad companies were furious when they would strike, um, and both parties kind of had a tough time because the Chinese workers didn't really have anywhere else to go. That was their job. They were working on the railroad. They couldn't really find a whole lot of other jobs, and also the railroad company really needed the workers, so they were really irritated when the strikes would happen. One of the things that if you worked on the railroad and you were Chinese, you would have to buy all of your own food, and you would have to buy it from the railroad store. So it was super expensive. Like they would inflate the prices. And so that's what caused a lot of problems with the railroad workers, is that they were expected to pay for all their own food and the prices were really high. So it was really hard to save money when you were working for the railroad because you had to buy all your own supplies and they were really expensive. And the wages were also very low. So you're going to see that there's going to be some trouble coming up ahead. And next time we read, you'll learn about what that trouble is. All right. Talk to you later.